Hello there, my name is Esther. I'm delighted to be asked to do a wee video for the Take 10 for Southside Church. I moved to Ayrshire in April 2019 and was welcomed by Billy and Jackie Porterfield into a Connect group quite soon after arriving, led by Alan Trivick. But I've not been at Sunday services very much due to the fact I've been travelling quite often or working at weekends. However, since lockdown, not been travelling at all, except not a good time to be actually meeting people from the Southside family face to face. But I'm trusting that that will change in the coming months. I work at Ayrshire Hospice and have been in palliative care for many years. And as I came into lockdown, it was a time where I was just returning to work, having been off for several weeks. The last year of life has been quite complicated for me. It's not been a straightforward transition. I have a lot of caring responsibilities for elderly relatives in Belfast, so travel very often. And I also was still trying to get my own house ready to be sold, but having spent a lot of time and energy on sorting out my parents' house, it has taken me a long time to try and get to grips with my own nightmare. Anyway, it would have been on the market probably in April had it not been for coronavirus, so those plans have all gone on hold for a bit. So for lockdown, for me, had some major advantages in that my life became simpler. I was no longer travelling as much, and I was very much in need of rest. However, it's not easy to organise care and to support from a distance, and we've been through a period where I was very concerned that my father's health in particular looked as though it might have been on a very rapid deteriorating pathway, and faced the prospect of perhaps either or both of my parents becoming very unwell, and I would maybe not see them alive again, or would not be able to go and support if their needs were much greater. And I found that initially quite difficult, and then realised I had to just hand it all over to God and trust that He would provide for their needs, and He would also provide the right things for me too. I'm very thankful to say my father has stabilised and has actually done quite well during lockdown. My mother has found it very difficult and has a lot of ongoing needs. So here I was in Ayr almost all the time, but living on my own, and although I'm comfortable in my own company, some of the time I really did miss people. I really miss not being able to eat meals with other people or have people around to my home to enjoy food and conversation together. The challenge of having to decide how to structure my days when I wasn't at work, and then work was not necessarily easy. It was a time of the patients I look after are experiencing loss and pain anyway, and to have the coronavirus on top of that meant that it was already quite difficult. So the big lessons, I suppose, for me have been about trusting God in a new and deeper way. Lessons many of us have been learning. I've been reading through the book of Exodus and realising that I've been reflecting a lot about experiencing what season am I in. I have been in a season where I felt that I want to make some transitions, perhaps towards spending more time working with people who have longer to live, and wanting to very much live out that bit where Jesus says, I've come that they might have life and have it to the fullness. Been thinking about transitioning beyond end-of-life care. But at this season where my parents' needs have been complex and changing, not really been able to move forward necessarily in the direction that I would like to go, or that I feel God's calling me to. But understanding the seasons, there was time spent in the desert, but there was also really rich times of learning there. wilderness time for God's people was a time of experiencing a deepening of relationship with Him, but also of trusting Him where where it wasn't possible to rely on the things that you normally would rely on. But it was also a place of God's supernatural provision, where there was no apparent food in the evening. Manna would be there in the morning. God's provision was not always lots in advance, but it was consistent, even when there was no visible sign. There was no visible sign of water, but water came from the rock. So that place of provision, but also that place of moving in God's time, moving forward when the pillar of cloud moved and staying put when the pillar of cloud was stationary. That place of trusting that God would, that this was part of a bigger plan and that God would reveal that to him, but that absolute dependence upon God. There's an old hymn that I love, and the chorus says, Jesus, I am resting, resting in the joy of what thou art. I am finding out the greatness of thy loving heart. And realising that it's easy to trust when things are stable, but that's actually not really all that much faith at all. It doesn't require a lot of faith for me to expect to be paid at the end of the month. In fact, it requires no faith at all. That's the situations where I cannot see what's happening or cannot see how the path will unfold. That's the place of trust. It's that place of trust of believing that my sins are forgiven. It's that place of trust of believing that God will speak to me when I spend time in His presence. That place of trust of believing that what I think the Holy Spirit is showing me, or if He's given me a word for someone else, of believing that He will use that to bring blessing or encouragement to someone else. That place of trust of choosing to believe that if I keep on praying that He is at work, even when I can't see outward signs of that. So there's been a lot of that throughout lockdown for me. And then latterly there was a very rich place of learning for me, but it was a very hard thing. I was in a situation where I felt increasingly undermined, and it started out very, very small and then escalated and snowballed into something very big, and I found it very upsetting, and I had to do a lot of soul searching about what was my contribution to this, but also feeling misunderstood. And it would have been very easy to have slipped into a place of self-pity, very easy to have bad-mouthed people whose actions had caused me and words had caused me a lot of pain. And it required an awful lot of leaning into God to try and understand what was happening, but also to really believe God says that He will work everything out for good, for my good and for His glory, believing that He would bring good out of this situation, even though it wasn't feeling good for me at all for a couple of weeks. Anyway, and also believing that He would give me a voice. Over the space of 2 or 3 weeks, things did come to a head, and various meetings and conversations were had where I finally felt understood and also eventually vindicated, though I wasn't sure if I couldn't expect to feel vindicated in the world's terms, but I knew my vindication would come from God. And having come through that and pressed into God, had a small number of trusted praying friends supporting me during that. It was a huge sense of victory. Felt that I'd really experienced God, as He is in the Psalms, about being a place of refuge and shelter. Psalm 61 says, lead me to the towering rock of safety, for you are my safe refuge, a fortress where my enemies cannot reach me. Let me live forever in your sanctuary, safe beneath the shelter of your wings. That place, the desert, was also learning about just living in God's presence as a place of sanctuary. And that's where I want to continue living, resting in the joy of who Jesus is and finding out His heart of goodness for me. And it is my prayer that you would also be able to rest in that place of His presence, no matter what storms or what uncertainty you're facing, and discovering His great heart of goodness for you. So blessings today, and thank you for making me feel so welcome at Southside. Hope we get to see some of you face to face in the coming months.